So a friend of mine came to me and was like, hey, will you come with me to this McKinsey company presentation because I don't want to go by myself? And I was like, I'm not interested in banking. She's like, it's consulting. I was like, I'm definitely not interested in consulting. And she was like, well, they have free cocktail shrimp. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm making $18,000 a year. I cannot afford cocktail shrimp. I am coming. So I went there, met some really amazing people, and ended up interviewing for a job, got an offer, and thought I'd try it for a few years. But the problem was my very first study was a study on technology commercialization, where a company had invented a gas sensor that was going to be going towards the auto industry, but it takes a long time to get into the auto industry. So in the meanwhile, they're like, how do we make money off of this? Where else in the world can we use it? And I was like, oh my gosh, I found my calling. Like as a PhD, I understand the technology, but oftentimes technologists are never taught how to actually bring things to market or what the real world's doing.
Welcome to In Focus. Today we have Vanessa Chan joining us. Thank you so much for joining us, Vanessa.
It's great to be on with you.
So, Vanessa, I know you've had just so many different roles. You were just in the Department of Energy. You had a tremendous career in consulting and education. I'd love to just hear now where you're moving for our audience as your next step, considering everything that's going on.
Yeah, so right now I am the inaugural Vice Dean of Innovation Entrepreneurship at Penn Engineering. And the thing I'm really excited about is the next generation, all of you, and really helping all of you to make a big impact. Throughout the thread of my entire career, it's really been focused on the interface of technology and business, and specifically how you take technology and actually bring it to market. So moving from lab to market, or otherwise known as commercialization. So really what I'm going to be doing here at Penn is empowering our undergrads and our grad students to be known for people who are not just deep in technology, but actually also know how to use technology to have an impact in the real world.
Wow, that's so
awesome.
cool.
Vanessa, I believe the first way that we connected was via my alma mater, SCH. We just had Ed Glassman from the CEL on the program. Are you still connected with the SCH community at all? I know you were on the board for a minute. Is that still part of your goings on now?
Yeah, so for those who don't know what SCH is, it's Springside Chancellor Academy. It's a pre-K to 12 school that is in Philadelphia, really trying hard to create the next entrepreneurs of the world, and they're pretty successful with you, Stephen, in terms of that. And yes, my daughter just graduated from there. I have another daughter right now who's a sophomore. Unfortunately, I had to step down from the board when I joined the Biden administration because you need to get rid of all your ties to everything else. But I'm still very closely connected, volunteer on the robotics team, and doing all the things that good parents do.
That's awesome. Is your daughter, who's still there, doing CEL stuff, taking the entrepreneurship mantle up?
Yeah, so, Center for Entrepreneurship Leadership is all part of SCH's DNA. And so even if she didn't want to, she'd have to, because that's part of the curriculum, but she really likes it and is really enjoying it. So she is. In fact, her CEL project this semester, I'm really proud of her, is focused on creating a STEAM camp for girls from grades 4 to 7, because last year she was a camp counselor at SCH for the robotics camp. And there was a little girl who joined the 2-week camp, and after the third day left because she was the only girl and she didn't feel like she fit in. So that really bothered my daughter. So she went and spoke to the school and was like, can we create a camp, or can I create a camp next year that is focused just on girls and STEAM? So they never asked a question whether or not they fit in. And they said, absolutely. What's the camp going to be about? And she's like, well, first of all, it's not going to be girly. Like we're, putting like light bulbs in dresses or anything like that. We're going to do hardcore STEAM work, but we're going to do it in a way where it's a supportive environment for girls. And I love that because, as somebody who also has been a girl in STEAM many decades ago, it's really important to support women going into this arena. And so I couldn't be prouder of how entrepreneurial my daughter has been, and through the support of SCH, of actually seeing a problem and now fixing it.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I'd love to talk a little bit about your career journey. I know we initially connected through one of your entrepreneurship ventures, but obviously you had a significant career before that. So I'd love to just hear about your entry into the professional world and just a little bit of background for our audience on where that journey has taken you to this point.
Yeah, sure. So maybe I'll start from the beginning where I went to Penn undergrad, got a degree in material science and engineering, and then went on to MIT to get a PhD in material science and engineering. And many people have a misnomer that, if you are deep in STEAM, you must be amazing at every single one of those acronyms. I was actually, unfortunately, not very good at math. I hate that stereotype, but it's true. I'm just not a conceptual thinker, but really good at making things. Like I'm a maker. I knit, I make jewelry, I do pottery. And so was really lucky that in the material science and engineering department at Penn, it's a very small department, and they really gave me a lot of great mentorship in the areas that I was not very strong. And I also was doing graduate level research as an undergrad, which is why I got into MIT. And so for those of you who are listening and thinking that if you're going to go into STEAM, you must be good at everything, you do not need to be good at everything. There are parts that you can actually squeak by if you're really strong in other arenas. And then because of the mentorship I had when I was at Penn, I was able to get into MIT despite only having a 3.6 something GPA because it's not all about GPA. It's about what do you do outside the classroom. So that's another theme I talk to a lot of people about. It was planning to become a professor. I had what people consider a really successful PhD, like a first authorship in science, patents. But my whole challenge was I spent 5 years on my PhD, but I wasn't sure how it's actually going to have an impact in the world. I had publications, but it's like, is it going to make a difference? And so a friend of mine came to me and was like, hey, will you come with me to this McKinsey company presentation because I don't want to go by myself? And I was like, I'm not interested in banking. She's like, it's consulting. I was like, I'm definitely not interested in consulting. And she was like, well, they have free cocktail shrimp. And I was like, oh my goodness, I'm making $18,000 a year. I cannot afford cocktail shrimp. I am coming. So I went there, met some really amazing people, and ended up interviewing for a job, got an offer, and thought I'd try it for a few years. But the problem was my very first study was a study on technology commercialization, where a company had invented a gas sensor that was going to be going towards the auto industry, but it takes a long time to get into the auto industry. So in the meanwhile, they're like, how do we make money off of this? Where else in the world can we use it? And I was like, oh my gosh, I found my calling. Like as a PhD, I understand the technology, but oftentimes technologists are never taught how to actually bring things to market or what the real world's doing. So I ended up spending 13 years at McKinsey, which is
Oh,
a very
Wow.
long time.
wow.
Yeah, I ended up co-leading the innovation practice. I was the first woman elected partner in the North America Chemicals practice, and was doing, having just a lot of fun learning in every single industry. That's the great thing about going to consultants. You can learn about healthcare, you can learn about insurance, you can learn about consumer electronics, and just learned what it took to actually commercialize technologies. And then through my daughter's school, SCH, where you were, Stephen, really was seeing that they were trying to create the next entrepreneurs of the world. And my then second grader had invented this thing called hair hugs, which she did a whole pitch on. She made prototypes and all that. And, as an inventor, I was like, that's really cool. And then meanwhile, I saw the movie Joy, where a woman had brought her mop onto QVC. And I was like, I have all these crazy inventions. I'm making all these things and jury rigging things in my house to make my life better. What if I could bring my invention to QVC? So I did something a little bit crazy. I left McKinsey, decided to launch my own products. People really liked my tangle-free headphones that convert into necklace. So then did a Kickstarter campaign and had a terrible video where, when I was looking at the click-throughs, nothing, like you just were seeing people weren't getting sticky to it. So I spoke to Ellen over at the SCH and was like, I have a terrible video. Do anybody might want to do video? She's like, oh, I have two people who are at NYU right now. Maybe they will do this. And then I called the two of you, and then you guys did the most amazing video on a nothing budget with it was just like, wow, these guys are going somewhere. And maybe at some point you can share the video that you guys
Yep.
put together. And that's how we got to know each other, right? So then as I was doing that, I became an angel investor, was learning how startups were working. And then Penn Engineering came calling and was like, would you consider being a professor of practice? Because you led innovation for McKinsey, you're an entrepreneur, and we're trying to figure out how to grow the entrepreneurship minor at Penn Engineering. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I'm at the mecca of where the issue is for engineers is we're not training engineers actually how to commercialize. And so I became the undergrad chair for my department, Material Science and Engineering, which is where it goes full circle. Where I went undergrad, I became the undergrad chair. And there were professors there who knew me since I was 17, who I now had to call by their first name.
Weird.
Isn't it
so
weird?
Yes.
It was so weird. I still have a problem calling Professor Pope David. But anyway, I had to do that. And then 2.5 years in, I got a phone call from the Biden-Harris administration asking if I would become the chief commercialization officer for the Department of Energy. And I was like, first of all, where did you find me? Secondly, if you know anything about me, I am not someone who is patient. I am not bureaucratic, and we're going to drive each other crazy because I'm going to want to do things. When I see something's wrong, I don't care what the status quo is.
Yeah.
We're going to fix it. And during the interview process, they're like, no, we want disruptors. We want people who actually want to change things. And you have this very strong vision on commercialization. Your name has come up multiple times. Would you do this? And I was like, well, I don't know. So I talked to some mentors, and they're like, when the President of the United States calls you, you kind of should do it. And if you don't like it, you can always leave, which is what I always tell a lot of the people I mentor. So I took it and I stayed there the full 4 years because they were true to the word, where I reported to the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm, who is one of the most amazing people in the world. And she really is an incredible boss, where when she has strong leaders, she's like, go, how can I support you? What do you need to do? And the first year I was at the DOE, there was the passage of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and Inflation Reduction Act, where we now had $500 billion to go towards the clean energy transition. When I started at DOE is very much focused on only research and development because that was where our money came from. We had 17 national labs. And the final 2 stages of commercialization or demonstration and deployment, and DOE had never done that. So now when we suddenly had this infusion that was 10 times the size of our annual budget to go towards this clean energy transition and towards demonstration deployment, it became really fun being the chief commercialization officer because I had to help DOE figure out how do we use that money to activate the 23 trillion in the private sector so we actually can bring all these clean energy technologies to market. And it meant we had to do a really big culture shift also within DOE to bring more of that private sector thinking into a very large institution. And so I had a blast there, expanded my team, and it was really fun because when I was at DOE, I was the head of the Office of Technology Transitions, OTT. So many government acronyms out there. So I nicknamed ourselves the otters, like OTT otters, because we're cute, friendly, animals that come in and help the ecosystem with tools. And, my budget was tiny, less than $20 million. And so it was really important that I was able to work with everyone else who had the money to figure out how do we get it out the door, because in the end, it was not my people, not my money that we had to move. It was DOE as well as the private sector. And so created a whole entire family of otters. Nobody had an ego. Everyone was collaborative, and we got a chance to really make a difference in the nation.
Wow. That's incredible.
So cool.
Yeah, I think I'm the first presidential appointee that was on QVC. I'm really sure about that.
Vanessa, so you've been in so many different sectors, and one of the main things that we always talk about is like storytelling, right? That's what the main purpose of this podcast is to discuss the role of storytelling. So, I mean, I'm just curious, even from the government standpoint, like what stories did you tell and like how were they conveyed as information?
Yeah, so I love the fact that you guys are focused on storytelling because I tell people that no one ever remembers the numbers, the facts or whatever. They remember stories. And I think that's what's brilliant about what you guys do is you're such good storytellers. Because in the end, if a story can move you, then you will be able to bring people to kind of your viewpoint. And Secretary Granholm was an amazing storyteller, by the way. She really set the most incredible bar for that. So in my case, really the storytelling that we were talking about was, in the end, even though a lot of people do care about the environment and care about sustainability and clean energy, for me, my truth has always been everyone who buys things never wants to pay more for anything. Like, I know you don't, I don't. And so the story I was trying to tell was how do we actually make these clean energy technologies economically beneficial to consumers? And if we can get to the point where these are the most cost-effective technologies, then that is when the private sector is willing to come and commercialize because they can make money. And there's nothing wrong with the private sector making money. That is the way it works. And so I was very clear that was kind of my end goal. And we also wanted to make sure we're creating jobs. We're doing American manufacturing. We were catalyzing the economy. So that was my North Star. And then P.S., these happen to be clean energy as well, is the way I've always thought about this. And that is why right now these pathways to commercial liftoff, which are the commercialization roadmaps that I quarterbacked for the Department of Energy with many, many people at DOE as well as in the private sector, are still on the DOE website at liftoff.energy.gov because we approached everything in a very bipartisan way. There's no policy in it. What we did talk about was here's what the pathway is to make it economical and beneficial for a consumer and for the U.S. And with this type of policy, here's how it could help it. But the
Yeah.
end goal was never the policy or you must do this because it's green. It was really, can we find a pathway to it? So I think the first point was understanding in a story what people actually care about and are there commonalities, especially given where we are right now, such a partisan country. Where do we actually have commonality? And where are we trying to reach the same goal? We may have different pathways to reach the same goal, but in the end, I think both sides want to have cheap energy. They want to have jobs for the middle class. They want America to be competitive, right? They want us to also be able to have communities that are thriving. So if you look at that, my goal was to really understand how do we actually get to that point through a clean energy lens. But if we can't do the first set of things I talked about, then it doesn't really matter because if you're a parent who's a single mom trying to get food on the table, working 3 jobs, you don't have the luxury to worry about climate change, right? You may in an existential way, but you're worried about the economy. And I think that's what's really important. And just to give you some storytelling here around the impact that we actually had, we have put the equivalent of 30 Hoover dams of clean electricity on the grid last year.
Wow.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a good story because you know the size of a Hoover Dam, right? And
Right.
we have created over 1,000 new or expanded manufacturing facilities in the U.S. Every single one of those facilities is in a community which needs the jobs coming out of it. And most of those facilities are in red states. So I think that is an important part of the story. For every dollar that we put out the door through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law and the Inflation Reduction Act, we had $6 of private sector money coming in to catalyze the nation to actually drive manufacturing. And these are the things that I think are really important for people to understand. And I think what's happening right now is the story is getting distracted with things that are not at the core of what people care about. And that is really what's troubling for me right now around the storytelling and the rhetoric.
That's, I mean, what you accomplished in your time there, and it sounds like even in just the last year is incredible, especially when you put it into a visual perspective like you just did. And I'm curious in your role as an educator coming back to Penn, how do you, I guess, what are the lessons that you take away from your time in government that affect how you approach teaching and building out the programs at Penn that you think can inspire the next generation?
Well, what's interesting is, I've been in a lot of different environments, right? From huge companies, right? The kind of clients that McKinsey serves, to startups, including you guys, to, government, national labs. But what's interesting for all of this is there was a common theme, including in my own journey, where, I went from an MIT PhD to McKinsey, and I had no idea how the world works. And like the first year, I was not very helpful at all because my way of thinking was very much steeped in science. And so when I was trying to do analysis, I had to read everything, and everything had to be, perfect to the last decimal, even though that didn't matter to the end answer. And so what's interesting is, I see that with all PhDs and people coming out of academia and even undergrads, is we don't give them the skills to actually understand how decisions are made in the private sector. We don't give them the language of commercialization. In fact, the language we use for commercialization universally is something called technology readiness levels, and they go from 1 to 9. They were invented by NASA in the 1970s to launch rockets to the moon. And so when you hit TRL9, you have a functioning rocket, which is great because in the 70s, you're NASA, you don't care about the cost of a rocket. You don't care about a permit to land on the moon. You don't care about being able to scale this economically. So people are like, oh, I hit TRL9, meaning their technology functionally works. Therefore, everyone's going to buy it. But having done commercialization for such a long time, people do care how much it costs. We do care. Do we have an issue with the workforce ability to scale this? Like, we have lost our manufacturing workforce in the US, and that is an issue. We don't understand permitting and how we can fix it. There are issues where some technologies people don't want anything to do with it, community perception. So I created a new language, which goes back to storytelling, called adoption readiness levels, which are the other risks that we have to address besides technology in order for a technology to make it to market.
Right.
And this is really important because if we're not on the same page of understanding, we actually can't bring anything to market. So in the end, it's the language, the storytelling, and being on the same page is really important. And so the adoption readiness levels has gone viral, meaning DOE is now using it to manage a lot of the dollars that we have because we really want to understand the risk of it. The Geneva Association, which is the insurance industry association, internationally has used it to create their own insurance risk framework for climate. The National Science Foundation is using it for their new TIP directorate, where they're trying to create these regional innovation engines. Breakthrough Energy, VCs, others are using it. And so I'm really excited because it's now getting us on the same page to understand all the things we have to address if something goes to market so that we're using the same components of a story, right? Now we have the same language, we actually can be on the same page, and that's been really important.
Vanessa, what's your approach to getting stories out to a larger audience?
I think the key is really understanding what are going to attract people to what is it that you're trying to do. People always really love underdogs. Growing up in Philly, for many people, right, that we're always rooting for the underdogs. And so for me, when I was doing this journey from being someone who had a steady paycheck to an entrepreneur, I was like, I'm a working parent looking to create the next generation of entrepreneurs, and I can't do that unless I role model it. And so I'm doing something crazy and trying to do this as a mompreneur. And I think people really resonated with that mompreneur. I think my favorite story in terms of underdogs was when I was on the Today Show competing for America's Next Big Thing. And there was a competition, right, where you actually had to get voting in the semifinals. So it was me and two other people. And we go to the Today Show set at 4 a.m. They do amazing hair and makeup. Steve Martin was on that day, so I got a chance to hang with him. And after the taping, we then had one day, right, to get as many votes as possible, and whoever won that voting would get in the finals. So I ran over to McKinsey offices, in my hair and makeup with my Loop-It, getting people to go vote. And then I ended up going home on the train. So I'm on the platform boarding the train, and a woman says to me, "Weren't you on the Today Show today?" And I was like, "I was." And it was like, I looked pretty glamorous with all like the hair and makeup. And she's like, "Aren't you trying to like sell something?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm trying to win a competition." So she's like, "Oh my gosh, I remember now." I showed her the vote. She's like, "Oh my gosh, we have to vote for you." And she like tells the people in the car, say, "Hey, she was on the Today Show today. She's trying to win a competition, which will change her life. So we all need to vote for her." So she's like, "Go do your pitch." So she introduces me and I do my pitch, which was really kind of awkward. But everyone got really excited. There was a guy who had never used an app to vote. So we taught him how to download the app and vote. And so, yeah, I go to sit back down. At this point, train 2165 is, getting out of the station. And they say to me, "Okay, get up." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, there's literally the entire train car of people. We're like, "You need to get up and get the rest of the train to vote." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, you need to go car to car and tell people you're on the Today Show today and they need to vote for you. And I'm like, "Are you guys insane? I don't know anybody here." And it's so embarrassing to like ask a train ride of strangers to go vote. And by the way, there could be clients on this, former clients on this train, because it was
Right.
like the Amtrak Express, or even worse, a former McKinsey colleague who's like, "Man, Vanessa's fallen on hard times. She's like hawking her wares on Amtrak right now. I don't know what's going on with her." And the entire car was like, "It doesn't matter. Imagine if you lose by train 2165 and you don't get on QVC, like your dream could be shattered." So this entire train car of people forced me out. And as we were moving from New York to Philadelphia, I convinced every single car to vote for me.
Oh my
And
gosh.
I know, isn't that nerve wracking? I mean,
Oh
I'm
So
my.
funny.
extroverted, but that is like craziness on another level. But that was my favorite story ever, because I put myself out there, did something that was incredibly uncomfortable. But every single person was rooting for me. Every single person went to vote. And when I got off the train, everyone was like waving out of the windows and hammering, going, "Good luck tomorrow." And I knew the next day they would be watching to see if I won. And I did, by the way, probably by train 2165. But that's, where I think the way you get out there is you just throw yourself out there and try things, right? Like I was cold calling CBS. They ended up putting me as a little snippet after the Grammys. And so you just need to go. Worst thing is people say no. And then best case is you have this amazing story, which is one of my favorite stories of my life and my career, is just having strangers help me.
That's awesome.
That's so
That is,
cool.
I didn't know that. That is
Yeah.
such a cool story.
Isn't it a cool story?
Wait, so the product ended up going on QVC? Is that
Yeah,
it?
it went on QVC. It did okay there. And then I went to Penn, and this was more of a dabbling for me to see if I could do it. So I made money off the whole thing, but I knew I was never going to be like a billionaire off of it. It was really more of an experiment, but it did well in terms of I didn't lose money off of it, which is the most important thing. In fact, I made money.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's awesome.
That's wild. That's really, really wild. So another question that we ask everyone that comes on, obviously our area of expertise is video and creative storytelling, and telling compelling stories that evoke emotion, get people to act. So obviously we have the collaboration with that part of your career, but just more broadly, have there been any other experiences with video storytelling as a means to convey ideas that are notable, or is that something that you have any anecdotes about, even beyond the Loop-It story?
Yeah, so when I joined DOE, there was a very big push towards the video side of it. And we had a really amazing digital team at the Department of Energy. And The Secretary of Energy is one of the best storytellers I've ever seen, just because she's a genuine human who is trying to do the right thing. And so I think the thing that they did really well was to bring the reality of local people and the impact the work we were doing on individuals. That individual storytelling was really, really important. There was one she did where there was a chemical plant that had been built next to a small town, and the chemical plant ended up just like Monopoly, buying all the different parts, and ended up surrounding a family grave plot. And so when this guy wanted to go visit his ancestors, he had to go through the chemical plant to go there. And so
Whoa.
just give you a real sense of, how industry sometimes can really have a personal impact on people. And because of the fact that the land was limited, when he was, going to pass, they were going to have to stack his body on top of his ancestors because there's no longer any room in the family graveyard. And so it's stories like that, which I think are really just puts a kind of fine point on the work that we're doing. I had a chance to go to Alaska, where we have one of our the NREL, which is one of our national labs, has an outpost there, and they spend a lot of time with the people in Alaska to understand what are the challenges they have, trying to use the power of the national labs and our deep science and technology and all that to really help them, right, with things like so. For example, one of the big challenges right now is with climate change. A lot of the land is receding if it's like frozen land, right? Like it's ice and people are building on it. So now they've created homes which actually are almost like on skis.
Hmm.
So as the land is receding, you can actually move the home.
Whoa,
Yeah, exactly. Isn't that cool?
that's wild.
Yeah, and so those are the kinds of things which I really, really value is when there's a problem, and then we're trying to understand how to use technology to solve that problem, and how it really impacts day-to-day life.
Wow. Yeah, that's the houses on skis is a crazy image. It sounds like something out of like series of unfortunate events or something, but I'm sure it's much more, practical than I'm imagining the visual of it. Um, I guess as just a final question, and we can wrap up, is what kind of bullet point advice do you have for, and obviously you've given some throughout this whole conversation, but what bullet point advice do you have for entrepreneurs with their first venture, or even brand marketers who are just trying to convey the value of the what they're tasked with conveying? If you have any immediate just things that you think would be valuable to those individuals.
Yeah, first of all, I would say for an entrepreneur, please go look at the adoption readiness levels. Those two are still on the DOE website. Really important because that is the language for commercialization, and VCs are going to be asking you questions about this because it is the language of commercialization. I think second is too often entrepreneurs have a baby that they're really obsessed with. And their baby is a beautiful thing because they've spent so much time thinking about it. And what I like to tell entrepreneurs, it's really important to realize that you are born with two ears, two eyes, and one mouth, and you have to use it in that ratio. So too often when, I was an investor and I was asking questions, they were defending their baby and telling me why my question was silly or trying to really convince me that their hypothesis and the things they were doing was right. When in reality, and by the way, I would never invest in a startup founder like that because it means if they're not listening to me, they're not listening to the customer. So it's really important as an entrepreneur to not be defensive. And if someone is questioning your baby, you literally need to ask them, well, why are you asking that? Ask the question why, and use your two ears, two eyes, and one mouth in that ratio. And if you do that, you'll be a much stronger entrepreneur because you're going to pick up on why something isn't working, and then you change the direction you're going to make it work. So that would be my biggest advice: is don't be defensive, and do this and listen more.
I think that's great advice, and definitely things that we could our former selves and our current selves probably could have used and can use. Michael, do you have any final questions for Vanessa before we wrap up?
No, this was tremendous. Thank you for joining us today, Vanessa. Really appreciate it.
I really appreciate the two of you. I mean, just looking at how well you guys are doing, it's amazing. So very flattered that you asked me to be on your podcast.
Thank you.
Thanks, Vanessa.
Thanks.